Steve, are you with us?
I am, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, so first off, and we've said already, congratulations on the victory. And we really appreciate it as citizens here in Minneapolis that we're living in a city where the city council takes digital rights seriously. I think that's really important. And before we get in the weeds of it, though, my actual honest question is, I think we're approximately-ish the same age. We kind of, I get a sense that we kind of look the same. We have the same background. Like, yep. What was your moment of like, all right, this is going to get bad? You know what I mean? Like, what was this kind of like, what for you in your narrative? Because I mean, with your background in sort of like labor issues and even documentary filmmaking, like, I get the sort of like social justice has always been part of your arc, but like, what was the moment for you where you were like, all right, these robots are starting to look like trouble? And what was that moment for you where you're like, this is actual trouble. We got to fight these robots?
Sure. I mean, I think there were several moments for me along the way. My career has kind of taken me in and out of tech and community organizing. And so this intersection of tech and race is really kind of where my whole career has lived in a lot of ways. So this is a nice convergence. But I would say, when I was very young, I had been working for a temp agency, so I was probably 21, 22. And they actually offered me a job as a temp agent, which turned out to be a terrible idea for so many reasons, including that, I kind of thought of temp agencies as these like cool places that you could show up and they'd offer you some flexibility because I was a white guy and I got treated really well. And I showed up and got a lot of that flexibility. And then as soon as I got in as a temp agent, they were right in the moment of transitioning to database work for tracking their jobs and tracking their employees. And what I noticed was happening, there was one particular law firm where we were placing receptionists, and they knew that legally they couldn't say we want a young, white, hot female receptionist, but that's what they wanted, right? And so if we sent anybody else, they wouldn't say you sent us somebody who doesn't look like what we want. They would say they showed up 5 minutes late from lunch, they didn't really pick up the phone, they did something inappropriate, and that would get entered in the computer system. And then that would follow them when I tried to place that person on their next job. They would get rejected by by my boss because they had some negative mark in their database. And so suddenly these things that used to not get tracked that way, that used to involve a human interaction and human judgment by a staffing person, were suddenly getting tracked in a database and would just follow that person forever. And I would end up giving people the advice, just go register with a different temp agency. You're done with us. We're never going to tell you that, but you're done with us. And so that was the first place where I just saw data starting to follow people and starting to accrue in a way that seemed really negative. Then in campaign work was the other place that I saw it. As I started getting active on political campaigns, we do all kinds of targeting, and that targeting often walks the line. I mean, it's all data that's sort of voluntarily given to us, as we talk to people at the doors or whatever, but we sort of accrue data over time. But we very intentionally target, and at least this was the strategy in the early 2000s, very intentionally target the people who are most likely to vote. And so what we're doing is we're creating a profile of people based on their voting behavior, based on what they've told us in surveys. And then we're replicating the structural inequity that leads to voting behavior being what it is. And those are the people we talk to remind them to vote. So then those are the people who vote the next time. And then those are the people who are most likely to vote in our algorithm the next time, and so on. And so as those algorithms got more and more sophisticated, they were more and more intentionally leaving out renters who live in apartment buildings, especially people who were sort of hard to access for organizers. And they were actually replicating a lot of the racial inequities that we would say on the campaign trail as campaign staffers or as volunteers we were trying to overcome. And so there was this real problem, even within very left-wing politics, and working on the Wellstone campaigns and Howard Dean's campaign and a lot of campaigns that I really kind of believed in over the years, that you would see these algorithms really pigeonholing people and leaving people out in a way that was not the intention, but technology, if you're not very intentional about equity, is going to replicate all the social effects of whatever you were doing before and just sort of accelerate them. And so those are a couple of ways in, I guess.
Yeah, I apologize. And then what I really appreciate about that answer, though, because I think it's what's so important to folks, because like it is what it is. It's 2021. And most people understand privacy is an issue. After 1/6/21, I think everyone gets that this filter bubble is an issue. We understand that deplatforming is an issue. We understand that algorithmic discrimination is an issue. People get creeped out because they say something around their phone and then they're getting advertising for it. But I think what you're showing is what the actual answer is, which is that these data-driven problems preceded TikTok and Facebook. And so we have to sort of like get our mindset straight to understand that this was a kind of like inevitable path that we ended up on, and not to be so freaked out about like the shiny tech of the day, but to take a step back and be like, well, no. What are the principles of equity that should have gone into this technology, or the principles of privacy or free speech or, reality, whatever you want to call it? And I think this actually leads into Shay's question, because for us, it's one of those things where you have so many issues happening at once, but we're seeing such little action, minus you and Manira's efforts. And we're trying to figure out like what does or doesn't make good coalitions, basically.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very interesting that the two specific points that you brought up didn't have anything to do with social media or a laptop or anything like that. And that's what everyone thinks of when they think of an algorithm. So I think it's very interesting that you talked about the different campaign work and the algorithms that go into that kind of stuff, and targeting different groups, whether it's minority groups or majority groups or whatever kind of group it is, or Slipknot fans, just like myself. But
that maybe should be targeted. I'm sorry, my friend. Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting that you talked about the actual real world implications that it has in terms of jobs and stuff like that. We're talking about people's lives that are affected by this. And that's very interesting that you brought that up. And that does bring me to my next question, which is, why is diversity important when it comes to digital ethics and when it comes to these algorithms?
And what we're saying is like not the sort of like tech equity part, but I think as you were talking about that, but like diversity of coalitions. Like it doesn't seem like this is not the traditional left issue or right issue or Republican or Democrat issue. So like, to you, what does a good diverse coalition of political actors on this look like? Or why is that sort of important for its success? Is that,
Yeah. So I think what was really powerful in the public hearing that we had a couple of weeks ago around facial recognition technology was the diversity of experiences of technology that people brought to it, right? Because I think we're all informed by the ways that we've been plugged into this stuff. And if it's been largely beneficial to us, or at least largely not harmful, it's easy to ignore it and to sort of let it go. But I think if I'm being honest, I'm informed by growing up as an American Jew who's 2 generations removed from technology being heavily used to in the process of trying to exterminate everybody I was related to, right? And that was a highly technological process that a lot of big tech companies participated in, and even in the coalition that we heard speak. The Japanese Citizens League spoke to their experience of being profiled and the ways the technology was used in our kind of shameful internment history, and that's something that isn't part of my experience, but certainly resonated with mine. Might not resonate with others, but I think was so important to telling the story. So we need the experiences of people who benefit, of people who are harmed in different ways, of people who are positioned differentially within that system, to make sure that we're really understanding what the impact is going to be. And then we have that the coalition has to have a commitment that as we identify those impacts, that we're committed to recognizing that those impacts matter, that we're going to take it seriously, even if it doesn't impact everybody. If somebody's saying, hey, this really has an impact on me, this is something that we need to listen to.
I mean, that global perspective seems incredibly important, Councilman Fletcher. And I think that is one of the things that people maybe don't realize. And I like that you're referencing the kind of like, I think the classic book is like Edwin Black, IBM and the Holocaust, but like the fact that these tech companies and these bureaucratic processes were always part of that. I know in our own advocacy work, we're not unaware of the fact that these tech companies here in America could also be part of, say, the Chinese social credit score system, or sort of what's going on with the internment camps there. But I think that gets to like, we're trying to end on a slightly note of optimism. So, and I'm not good at that, but maybe Shay is better at that than me.
Yes, I do seem to be a little more optimistic than
true.
you.
Yeah.
But I guess I grew up in a slightly younger generation than the two of you, and that may be an assumption, but I'm gonna go ahead and make it. But my generation personally grew up where we don't know what it's like to not have technology. And that's a big part of our lives. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. I mean, I grew up personally with my mom constantly telling me that everything that goes on the internet follows you for the rest of your life and that kind of thing. But that's something that I don't think a lot of people fully realize. And that kind of brings me to my next question of why are digital rights civil rights? So why does that digital world matter to us in terms of civil rights and when we think about human beings as human beings?
I think for me, it's so much of how we're living today that we have to consider it part of civic space. And that, by the way, is not a bad thing. I think often these conversations take us down a rabbit hole where we start to sound like technophobes or Luddites. And I think it's actually really important for me that the reason we're trying to create a framework of civil rights within the digital space is so that we can use the digital space because it offers so much joy and beauty and efficiency and potential. And I think when you look at how cities can operate, when you look at the jobs that human beings do, that frankly, our world would be better if we didn't need to ask human beings to do those jobs. And there are things that if we could automate and restructure our economy over time in a way that leans less on some really tough labor, gosh, I mean, there are things that could be really good about that if we care for people and if we care for the consequences of that and if we don't leave people behind in it and if we don't harm people through the process. And so for me, I think figuring out how do we build the kind of coalition that can actually assert what the future could be that includes everyone and that respects people's rights within a technological framework, I think that's really where the potential is. And so the goal of this policy work has not been to say, oh, technology is bad and scary and we should get rid of it. The goal of this policy work has been to create a framework that lets us view that technology through the lens of how does this help people, how does this harm people, what responsibilities do we have with it, can it be okay if we put some constraints on it, or is it something that's just not okay? So that we have a framework for doing that we can all agree on, and then we can all trust each other in using that technology together.
No, I think that's the perfect answer, because I think you're right. There is this knee-jerk reaction where if so much is bring up the fact that, like, hey, maybe this company shouldn't sell my data to this other company, that somehow you are saying that we need to go back to 1995, which for the record, 1995 wasn't all that bad. But I appreciate saying that, because I think what we're really talking about, and it's why community conversation is so essential. Like, even the Supreme Court has sort of, in a hilarious opinion, US v. Jones, said, we don't even know what you people want anymore. Like, we kind of gave you these privacy protections and these employment protections, and then you got a phone and threw it all away. But it's really an interesting case, because they sort of say, you all need to talk amongst yourselves and come up with some sort of digital ethos. And when you have that, come back to us and maybe we'll start trying to enforce it. But I think maybe this is the time to kind of open up the whole conversation. And Councilman Fletcher, first off, thank you for your time. You and Manure, I'm hoping we're going to stick around for a second, but thank you for the time and the effort that you've put in with this event and all week, which we really, really appreciate.